Hi, my name is Ruth. I used to believe that if I stayed quiet, I'd be respected. That if I gave enough, they'd remember where they came from. But one day, I found my name erased from the mailbox. My bedroom turned into a playroom, and the house my son once promised me sitting on the market without a word. They planned my future like I wasn't in the room, made financial decisions in my name, held meetings behind closed doors while I folded napkins in the kitchen. How did I become the ghost in a house I helped build? And what happens when that ghost finally decides to speak? The wine glass caught the evening light just right as Elowen set it down in front of me. Careful. Ruth, she said, her smile sweet as syrup. Older folks confuse easier after 2 sips. She laughed. Brandon chuckled along. I smiled too reflexively, the way a person does when they're told a joke at their own expense and know they're expected to take it lightly. I lifted the glass without a word, feeling the burn before the wine ever touched my lips. Brandon shifted the conversation before I could even decide if I should speak. Mom, did you see the shed I put up last weekend? He asked, eyes already on Elowen as she served June a second helping of lasagna. I nodded, even though I hadn't. My place at the table was clear not as the matriarch, not even as a participant, but as an audience, one that clapped politely on cue. I took a small sip, slower than usual, and the wine tasted like distance. Later, in the kitchen, I wiped down the counters while Elowen and Brandon leaned against the island, laughing at June's baby videos on the tablet. Their voices bounced around the tiled room, warm and private. I looked over briefly videos from birthday parties, first steps, a beach trip. All moments Elowen had insisted I skip because it'll be chaotic. And you hate the mess, don't you, Grandma? Were you there when I was little? June asked, not looking up from the screen. I paused mid-wipe. Of course, sweetheart, I said gently, but she was too engrossed to hear me. Elowen didn't correct her. Brandon didn't look over. I turned back to the counter, drying a spot that was already dry, weeks ago. I'd sat with June on the back deck and admitted, quietly, sometimes I miss having my own space. It wasn't a complaint, just an old woman's musing, but Elowen had taken that and presented it to Brandon as Mom wants out, twisting it into ammunition. That afternoon, I overheard her tell him, she's just feeling her age. She gets confused about what she wants. Her voice held concern on the surface, but underneath it, I heard the verdict Ruth is not to be taken seriously. I stayed silent. There's a kind of strength in that. I've learned. But silence has weight, too. It piles up, slow and invisible, until one day you feel it settle on your chest while folding laundry or rinsing a glass. Brandon and Elowen sat on the porch that night, soft porch lights haloing them in gold. I passed by the screen door quietly and caught Elowen's voice. She's just too emotional these days. Brandon didn't argue. He never does. I went back to the kitchen, picked up the wine glass still sitting near the sink mine from earlier, still half full. I poured the rest down the drain, rinsed it clean, and dried it thoroughly. Not just a chore, a gesture, a boundary, a ritual for the invisible. I wasn't crying. I didn't even feel like crying. I just felt gone. Later that night, in my room, I opened a scrapbook I hadn't touched in years. Tucked between the pages were old printouts from Brandon's college portfolio, drawings of houses, floor plans he'd sketched when he still believed dreams were made of blue ink. On one page, a wide lake house with wraparound windows, a chimney, and handwritten notes in the margins. Someday, Lake Champlain, home forever. I traced the lines with my fingers. He'd forgotten about this house, but I hadn't. The sun wasn't up yet, but I was. Sleep had been elusive since that night. My thoughts kept circling the same memory. Brandon, age 18, crouched over his sketch pad, the lake house in his imagination pouring onto paper. He had called it our forever place, as though I would be there too, tucked into some sunlit guest room. I remembered the pride in his voice when he handed me that drawing, folded twice, edges smudged with graphite. I had kept it all these years, in a keepsake box I kept beneath the bed. Nestled among photos from when he still needed me, I hadn't opened it in ages. But this morning, something made me reach for it. I sat cross-legged on the bed, the box resting on my lap like a fragile memory. Inside, the sketch was still there, faded but intact. The windows he'd drawn were tall and arched, the porch wide enough for rocking chairs and quiet evenings. In one corner, he had scrawled Lake Champlain with a question mark full of hope. I held the paper gently, like it might crumble. He never mentioned that house again, not in college, not after graduation, not even when he and Elowen bought this place in Montpelier. The dream had vanished quietly, like so many things between us. After breakfast, I offered to walk June to the bus stop. The air was crisp, and she clutched my hand as we crunched along the sidewalk. I asked casually, "Do you know if your dad ever talks about the house he dreamed of building when he was young?" June shrugged. "Mom said it was just a fantasy. Dad doesn't really talk about dreams. He's too busy." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Elowen's words filtered through the child's mouth like truth. Just a fantasy, as if the dreams of an 18-year-old boy didn't matter, or worse, as if the people who believed in them didn't matter either. 2 weeks ago, June had her birthday party. It was a small gathering, just family and a couple of neighborhood kids. I'd planned my gift carefully, a collector's edition of her favorite book series, out of print and hard to find. I had wrapped it in blue foil paper, the kind she liked, with a card tucked inside that read, "To my dearest June, from Grandma Ruth, with all my love, at the party." June tore open the package and squealed with delight. "Thank you." "Mommy," she cried, hugging Elowen tightly. I stood frozen. The card was gone. The wrapping was the same, but someone had replaced the tag. Elowen met my gaze across the room, her smile unreadable. I didn't say a word. What would be the point later that day? While cleaning up, I found my card crumpled near the trash. No explanation. No apology. Just another erasure, as though I had imagined the whole thing. This afternoon, Elowen was in the living room with June again, flipping through a glossy magazine. I stood in the doorway, unnoticed, as Elowen picked up my favorite potted fern, a Boston variety I'd nurtured since Brandon was in college, and moved it off the coffee table. In its place, she laid out a double-page spread featuring her photo under the headline, "Women in PR, Local Leaders Making Waves." I said nothing, just watched. Brandon walked in, glanced at the magazine, and kissed her on the cheek. "You really are good at leading without making noise," he said. My plant sat on the floor beside the couch, ignored. That night, I went back to the dresser and took out the sketch again. I propped it up against the mirror. I was done hiding it away. Something about seeing it again, about remembering that version of my son, made me want to hold on tighter to the part of him I once knew. On a whim, I searched online. It didn't take long. There it was, listed by a lakeside agency. Rustic beauty meets modern design. 4 beds, 3 baths, lake access, wraparound porch. The price was steep, but not unattainable. My pulse quickened. The same house, his dream house. Maybe he had forgotten, but I hadn't. The bell above the antique shop door jingled as I stepped inside, the scent of old paper and lemon oil comforting like an old friend. I had my eye on a pair of ceramic bookends shaped like sleepy foxes. June had recently begun collecting animal figurines, and these would look lovely on her little shelf if Elowen hadn't cleared out my space. They might have gone on mine, at the register. I reached into my purse for my card and offered a smile to the young man behind the counter. He swiped once, then again. A frown creased his face. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It's not going through." "That's odd," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Try it again, if you don't mind." He did. Still nothing. He leaned in slightly. Voice low, not unkind. "Sometimes, when accounts are shared, limits get set by the other holder, usually a son or daughter." I managed a chuckle. I suppose it's just a hiccup. I left the foxes behind, though they seemed to watch me go with sympathy in their sleepy eyes. Outside, I stood at the corner, wind catching the edge of my scarf. I didn't want to go back to the house. Not yet. I spotted the old payphone kiosk across from the post office, the kind people barely noticed anymore. I stepped inside and lifted the receiver, pressing the number on the back of my debit card with stiff fingers. The wait music chirped and crackled until a woman's voice came through. "Thank you for calling First Elm Financial. How can I assist?" "I'd like to inquire about a restriction on my card," I said, trying to sound composed. After the security questions, she confirmed what I feared. Yes, there's a temporary hold placed under a financial oversight provision. The authorized guardian is listed as Elowen Ramsey. I let the silence stretch before saying, "Thank you. Would you like me to?" "No," I cut in. "That won't be necessary." My hand trembled as I replaced the receiver. The glass of the booth reflected my face older, lined, with eyes I barely recognized anymore. When I returned home, the house was unnervingly quiet. I climbed the stairs slowly, as though I might find something different at the top. And I did. The door to my room creaked open to a place I no longer recognized. The quilt I'd hand-stitched during Brandon's deployment was gone. My late husband's picture, the one where he was holding baby Brandon in a Red Sox cap, missing. In their place stood a fold-out couch, beanbags in pastel hues, and a large wall-mounted screen playing some children's cartoon on mute. The bookshelf was empty. Even the faint smell of lavender sachets was gone. I stood there for a full minute, not moving, as if I stepped inside a stranger's Airbnb. "Elowen wanted to make this a creative space for June," said Brandon behind me. I turned. He stood in the hallway, not entering, like it was easier to defend the decision from a distance. Elowen stepped past him with the ease of someone who knew the house bent to her will. She needed a space of her own. Elowen said cheerily, "And since you barely use the room next time," I said, "I'd like to be asked before being erased." Neither responded. That night, I sat at the edge of my bed now, merely a cot in the laundry room, my back straight, my thoughts sharper than they had been in weeks. I opened my old wooden jewelry box, pushed past the rings and brooches I no longer wore, and found my old checkbook. The pages smelled faintly of cedar. On the first clean page, I wrote what I still own, and I began to list. The car, still in my name, a small pension, separate from the joint account, my wedding ring, and maybe, just maybe, the house Brandon once dreamed of. I was headed to the kitchen for a glass of water when I heard it. The door to the den was closed, but not tightly enough to muffle the conversation completely. I paused, caught off guard by the unmistakable tone of Brandon's voice, measured, rehearsed. "I just think it's time we start planning for the transition," he said. Elowen chimed in, her voice brisk and professional. "Long-term care placement doesn't mean we're pushing her out. It means being prepared, for everyone's sake." There was a faint buzz of someone else speaking an advisor. Perhaps. I couldn't make out his words, but I caught the phrases they repeated: guardianship authority, asset consolidation, and worst of all, minimize residual complications. They were talking about me, planning my life without me. I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand trembling around the glass I never filled. My presence had been reduced to a file, a plan, a problem. Later that night, when the house was quiet and Brandon and Elowen had retreated upstairs, I tiptoed into the home office. The trash bin next to the desk still had a crumpled sheet of paper sticking out, and I pulled it out with the hesitant fingers of someone who knew she shouldn't but couldn't not. Transition plan for Sylvia Keener, Ruth. They were using my maiden name. To remove me cleanly, to legalize the shifting of titles and ownerships, the draft included a list of suggested steps: transfer shared utilities, consolidate discretionary accounts, reduce spatial footprint, reallocate retirement funds under joint oversight. I read the lines twice, then folded the paper and placed it gently back into the bin. I wasn't sure why I did that habit. Maybe, or courtesy. Old instincts of not making a mess. But inside, something clicked. I sat on the edge of my bed, legs cold, the old rug not offering much comfort. Then I reached under the bed frame and pulled out a small chest with a brass latch. My fingers found the old envelope with my documents, passport, social security card, bank forms, all under my maiden name, Sylvia Keener. They'd forgotten I'd been someone before being mom, before being grandma, before being an emotional liability. I pulled my laptop closer and typed slowly into the real estate registry, checking the house. The house. Brandon's dream house, the one he used to draw again and again as a teenager. The one with the cedar siding and the lake view. The one he said we'd grow old in together, when I was still someone he wanted in his future. And there it was. Listed. For sale. Still available? I called Mr. Hallstein the next morning. He answered on the second ring, the same way he always had when we worked together back when I managed the community theater fund. He still called me Miss Keener. I'd like to make a cash offer. I said, "You're sure?" He asked gently. Not because he doubted me, but because he remembered my husband, my old life, my patience. Yes, I said. I'm done waiting for the respect I already earned. At the notary's office, the paperwork didn't take long. I signed with deliberate care, my full name flowing with a steadiness I hadn't felt in months. Sylvia Keener, property owner. I put the deed in a velvet folder I had once used for Brandon's graduation certificate. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Back home. I found the kitchen filled with the smell of toasted bagels and fresh strawberries. Elowen was talking to June about visiting open houses that weekend. We'll see a few by the water. I think your dad would love the cedar ones, she said brightly. I walked in, poured myself coffee, and joined them at the table. Real estate's such a tricky game, I said, adding cream. One never knows who's already made the winning move. No one replied. Brandon's voice was cheerful as he greeted the banker across the desk, Elowen at his side in a navy blazer too polished for a simple loan appointment. The room was sterile in the way all banks seem to be wood grain laminate and artificial ferns, designed to make you feel trust without comfort. Let's talk numbers, Brandon said. We found a lake property we love, big wraparound porch, wood beams, right off Champlain. The banker pulled up the listing on his monitor and then paused, eyes narrowing. Ah, that one. He clicked something, scrolled, and then blinked twice. I'm afraid that property's already sold. Elowen leaned forward. That's not possible. We toured it 5 days ago. They told us no offers had come in. The banker cleared his throat. I understand. But as of yesterday, it's been closed, paid in full, cash buyer. Brandon sat back. Cash. The banker turned the screen slightly. Purchased by a Sylvia Keener. Elowen went still. Brandon's face turned from confusion to something else pale, drawn, like blood had dropped from his lips to his shoes. He didn't say another word. That afternoon, I stood in the kitchen, slicing ripe peaches, letting the juice run down the side of the blade. The sunlight hit the counter just right. I had just wiped it clean. Elowen stormed in, eyes narrowed, voice low but furious. "Did you buy the Lakeview house?" I didn't flinch. I simply looked up, knife still in hand, and said, "I didn't know I needed your permission." She scoffed, crossing her arms. "Why would you do that?" Brandon walked in then, color returning to his face in blotches. "Mom, you could have talked to us." I set the knife down with deliberate care. "Talk to you like during your estate planning meetings. When you drafted my future without me, they said nothing. It's my name on the deed, my money, my decision." They stayed frozen, 2 statues in my kitchen. The next morning, I stepped out to check the mailbox. My nameplate, Ruth Ellen Shipman, in brass, was gone. In its place, a new placard, shiny and soulless, reading "The Ramsey Shipman Residence." It was nailed in crooked. I didn't touch it. Just took out my phone and snapped a photo. I saved it without comment, then walked to the grocery store as if nothing had changed. Later, I pulled out the folder where I kept important papers. I laid the property deed beside my late husband's Army discharge certificate and an old letter he once sent me during his deployment. In it, he'd written, "Always have your own name on something permanent." I still did. This wasn't revenge. This was remembering who I was before they rewrote me. That evening, Elowen prepared dinner, her famous lemon chicken, arranged perfectly on rectangular white plates. Brandon uncorked wine, poured it carefully. Their voices were light, measured, performative. Neighbors were invited. It was a dinner meant to present normalcy. "Before dessert," Brandon said with a practiced smile, "we just want to share some exciting news. We're close to securing our dream house, finally." I let the moment breathe. Then I smiled, just as calmly. "You mean the one I already own?" The room dropped into silence. Elowen's wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the hardwood. Morning light streamed through the living room windows, casting soft, familiar patterns across the hardwood floor. I stepped in slowly, mug of tea warming my hands, instinct guiding me to the corner, my corner where I always began my day. But the rocking chair was gone. In its place stood a sleek white side table and an oversized fiddle leaf fig tree, its glossy leaves stretching upward like they belonged. But they didn't. Not in my space. I stood still, waiting for some part of this to make sense. I checked the hallway. Nothing. Then opened the garage. There it was, wrapped in plastic like old patio furniture, pushed behind the lawnmower and Christmas decorations. No note, no explanation, no respect. I stood with my hands on my hips, not out of anger, but out of something older and heavier. Some kind of knowing. Like I was watching the last brick slide out of a wall I once believed in. Later that day, I found Brandon out back, kneeling next to the sprinkler system, fiddling with the valve. I waited until he looked up. "Do you know where my chair went?" He wiped sweat from his brow. Elowen thought it didn't match the room. Said it was creaking too much. I tilted my head. Some things creak because they've stood the test of time. He didn't respond. Just looked down at the sprinkler like it suddenly needed urgent repair. I walked back inside without waiting for a word more. That evening, Elowen and June were curled up on the couch, watching a nature documentary with the volume turned low. The plant stood proud in the corner, its pot casting a shadow over the wall where the chair used to rest. Without a word, I went into the garage, peeled back the plastic, and carried the chair in myself, The wood was heavier than I remembered, or maybe I was just more tired. I placed it back where it belonged. Neither Elowen nor June said anything. I sat. The chair groaned beneath me, a sound so familiar it felt like home. I rocked back once, twice. The creaking was purposeful. Later that night, I opened the notebook I'd kept hidden in my dresser, the one where I had begun listing the things I still owned. I turned to the last page. My voice. I wrote, my chair. My space in this home, until I choose otherwise. I closed the notebook slowly, letting the weight of the words settle. The next morning, after breakfast, I called them both into the dining room. They arrived slowly, Brandon still buttoning his shirt, Elowen with her arms folded, eyebrows already raised. I gestured for them to sit. They did. I've allowed myself to shrink for years. I began. Each time I kept silent to keep the peace. I made myself smaller. They said nothing. I stayed quiet when I was made the subject of financial plans I never approved, when my belongings were moved, when my name was taken off my mailbox, when you turned my room into a play space and pretended it was generous. Brandon lowered his eyes. Elowen crossed her arms tighter. This chair, I said. Voice steady. Goes nowhere unless I carry it myself. I stood up. That includes me. It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind where the house moved slowly and the sunlight lingered on the counters a little longer. Elowen had gone to yoga. Brandon was tinkering with the water heater, and June sat cross-legged on the living room floor, flipping through a coloring book. I offered to braid her hair, something I hadn't done since she was little enough to sit still without fidgeting. She perched on a cushion while I worked, her hair fine and soft between my fingers. "Grandma," she asked, without looking up, "did you really live here or were you just visiting all this time?" The question landed like a pin through silk. I paused for a breath, fingers suspended mid-braid. "Oh, honey," I said, smiling gently. "What makes you ask that?" She shrugged. "Mom says this was never really your place, just somewhere you stayed after Grandpa died." I resumed braiding slowly, keeping my tone even. "Well, sometimes people forget what others helped build." June didn't answer, already flipping to the next page in her book, but I wasn't braiding anymore, I was bracing. Upstairs. I opened the drawer where I kept the velvet runner Tom gave me on our 30th anniversary. I laid it across the dresser like a declaration. On it, I placed the envelope, the one with the deed, inside, in my neatest cursive. I wrote across the back just in case they forget again. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at it for a while, like I was trying to remember who I had been when someone still called me partner. The brunch invitation came late that night via group text, surprise celebration tomorrow at noon. Casual. Please wear something neutral. Neutral, I thought. Like beige. Like invisible. By the time the guests arrived the next day, the house had been transformed. White tablecloths, gold napkin rings, printed menus. The kind of decor Elowen would call elevated rustic. The whole event smelled of curated warmth. I was given a seat near the back corner, between the buffet table and the hallway to the powder room. As Brandon rose to give his speech, Elowen touched his arm and whispered something. He nodded, then cleared his throat. "We've always dreamed of owning this home by the lake," he began. "It represents our next chapter, a place of peace, of family, of legacy." My fingers brushed the envelope in my lap. I stood slowly. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said, voice even but not quiet, "but I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Brandon's smile froze. "I closed on that house 2 weeks ago." I continued. "Paid in full. My name's on the deed." I walked up to the center table, placed the envelope atop the centerpiece of dried flowers, and returned to my seat. The room fell into silence so absolute. Even the ice in the glasses seemed to pause. No one spoke. Not Brandon, not Elowen, not the woman beside me who had just commented on the flaky scones. I took a sip of water, folded my napkin, and stood again. I thought it was time someone remembered who taught him to dream in the first place. In the kitchen afterward, I stood by the stove, filling the kettle. Elowen appeared in the doorway, her wine glass trembling slightly. You could have told us," she said. I turned the burner on and reached for my favorite mug. "You asked for silence," I said. "I gave it to you. Until now." The Sunday lunch was casual by design but coordinated by Elowen down to the napkin folds. Brandon grilled chicken on the deck, and the dining room table was set with earth-toned placemats and an unnecessary centerpiece of floating candles. The new picture frame on the wall caught my attention first, a photograph Elowen and Brandon standing in front of a cedar-sided house, smiles wide, arms wrapped around each other. Above the frame, in looping script, future goals. I scanned the image slowly. I wasn't in it. Not even a mention. Just like so many other frames on these walls now. I stepped away quietly, returned to my room, and opened the storage box at the bottom of the armoire. The sketch was still there. Faded pencil lines traced the outline of a house with long windows and a porch that stretched like arms open to the lake. Beneath it, in Brandon's childlike scrawl, "One day I'll buy this for you. Mom." 12 years old. A promise he believed then. A promise he forgot. I stared at the drawing, smoothed its worn edges, and felt something both heavy and clarifying settle into my chest. Not sadness, not rage. Something else. Like a knowing that had always been there, finally sitting down beside me. After dessert, while the others passed around coffee and lemon bars, I excused myself briefly and returned with the drawing now placed inside a silver frame, polished just that morning. I walked to the dining room wall and set the framed sketch right beside the photo labeled "Future Goals." Conversation hushed. I just wanted to share something. I said evenly, "This was drawn by Brandon when he was 12. He told me it was the house he'd build for me someday." A few soft laughs emerged, nervous and unsure. I stopped waiting for that promise to come true when I turned 68. I continued. "So I bought the house myself." The room fell silent. Utensils stilled mid-air. Elowen's smile fractured, her eyes flickering toward the photo. Brandon's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came. I looked at them, not out of anger, but out of clarity. I don't need this house to prove anything now, but I wanted you all to remember it was mine before it became your backdrop. Still no response. I adjusted the silver frame, stepped back, and turned toward the door. June caught up to me near the foyer, tugging gently at my hand. "Is it really yours?" "Grandma," she whispered. I smiled. It always was. Back in my room, I hung the sketch on the wall above my writing desk, not hidden in a box anymore, not tucked behind old things, centered, framed. I opened my journal and wrote a single sentence I didn't take back the house. I took back my history. When I closed the book, the hallway outside was quiet, and for once, the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like truth. The morning after the sketch confrontation, the house felt hollow, not empty, exactly. Voices still carried from the upstairs hallway. The fridge still hummed, but the air had changed. Or maybe I had. No one said good morning. June slipped out with her backpack before I could ask if she wanted toast. Brandon didn't glance up from his phone. Elowen moved around the kitchen like I was a coat rack in the corner, something stationary, silent, easily ignored. I reached into the cabinet for my favorite mug, the one with the faded floral print I'd used every morning for 5 years. It was gone. In its place stood a glossy white ceramic mug with Supermom etched in gold cursive. It wasn't mine. The message arrived a few hours later. Elowen's name popped up on my screen. Let us know when you'll be ready to discuss the estate planning again with clarity. Brandon didn't send a follow-up. He never did anymore. I typed back slowly, deliberately. There's nothing to clarify. Just truths you're not ready to live with. And I hit send. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Hammond from next door knocked gently on the front door, holding a mason jar of sun tea. I won't stay long, she said, her voice kind. I just wanted to check in. We noticed something shifted at brunch. I opened the screen door and let her in. We sat in the den, the room still smelling faintly of furniture polish and strained politeness. Is everything all right? Ruth, she asked. I smiled faintly. Sometimes the truth echoes longer than the lie ever did. She reached over, gave my hand a soft squeeze. You're not the first matriarch I've seen exiled, but you're the first who made it look like a strategy. When she left, I stood in front of the family portrait hanging in the hallway. Brandon, Elowen, June. Me, off to the side, cropped slightly by the frame. I took it down, in its place. I hung a hand-painted landscape of the lake house done by a local artist whose work I'd admired for years. It wasn't perfect. The lines were too soft, the trees a bit too green, but it was mine. I wrapped the family portrait carefully in brown paper, added a note, "History belongs to those who honor it." Then I mailed it to Brandon's office address. Let them decide what it meant. That evening, I walked through each room of the house. The spaces were familiar, but no longer mine. Not really. Not anymore. I returned to my room, sat at my desk, and opened my journal. Sometimes the loudest revolution is stillness. I wrote. I paused, stared at the line for a moment, then turned the page. I began sketching a list items to move, things to keep, names of utility providers I'd need to call. It wasn't a dramatic act. It was practical. I was planning, not an escape, a return. I wasn't running away from this house. I was walking toward my own. I started with the small things. A scarf my mother gave me, soft with age but still holding the faintest scent of lavender. My wedding photo, the one where Tom wore a crooked boutonniere and looked at me like I was both beginning and ending. The folder with the deed placed carefully at the bottom of my suitcase. Everything else stayed behind. The keepsakes we once called family heirlooms. The photo albums curated by Elowen. The ceramic mixing bowl Brandon had given me one Mother's Day and later handed to Elowen with the phrase, "You use it more anyway." None of it came with me. If I wasn't in the story anymore, I wouldn't carry the photo album like I still belonged. Brandon passed by the doorway, stopped when he saw the open suitcase. Going somewhere, he asked, more cautious than curious. I folded a blouse, laid it flat. "I'm going home." He hesitated. "We didn't know you were serious about the lake house." "I was," Elowen's voice chimed from the hallway behind him. "Do you want us to help you find a moving truck?" I zipped the suitcase slowly. "No. I have something smaller. It's called dignity." They didn't respond. The silence was familiar now. I wore it like a jacket that finally fit. Later that morning, Mrs. Hammond came by with a mason jar of daisies from her front yard. "I heard," she said softly, not asking how. "In neighborhoods like ours, word moved faster than light. You've always been the heart of this street," she added. "Hearts keep beating." I said, "Just sometimes they find a different body." She smiled, set the jar on the table, and gave my arm a squeeze. "They'll miss you." I didn't answer. Some things don't need closure. Some doors don't need slamming. They just stop being opened. I packed the last box into the trunk of my car and slid into the driver's seat. The road out of Montpellier was familiar and strange, like an old friend whose name I'd almost forgotten. I drove in silence for a while before reaching into the glove box and pulling out an old cassette. Brandon had made it when he was 8, a mix of his favorite songs from the radio, interspersed with him singing snippets into the recorder. "I'll build you the biggest house ever. Mommy." His little voice chirped between songs. I listened until I couldn't anymore. Then I pressed eject. The lake came into view like something out of a memory I hadn't dared believe was still mine. I turned into the gravel drive, tires crunching steadily towards something I had already chosen. The house was quiet. No real estate signs. No waiting. Just mine. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and felt the air shift. It didn't smell like lemon cleaner or Elowen's candles. It smelled like wood and lake water and fresh air. It smelled like me. The first thing I did was hang the deed on the wall above the fireplace, not to show off, but to remind myself that sometimes we need to see our names in print to remember we exist. Then I moved the rocking chair to the window, facing the water. I sat down, leaned back, and exhaled. They'll tell the story their way. I just made sure I'm not erased from mine. The mail came just before noon, tucked neatly into the box at the end of the gravel drive. I hadn't been expecting anything, but inside were 2 envelopes, one addressed in Brandon's tight, slanted script, and the other in June's unmistakable pink marker. I carried them inside, sat by the window where the light was warmest, and set both on the sill beside my rocking chair. I opened Brandon's first, just one line still trying to understand. No apology, no anger, just confusion folded into 8 words. I placed the letter back in its envelope, then laid it flat beside the other. June's remained sealed. I wasn't ready to open it yet, not because I feared what was inside, but because I wanted to feel steady when I read it. Some words are meant to be heard when the heart is calm. That evening, I made dinner like I always had, 2 plates out of habit. I caught myself setting the second with care silverware straight, cloth napkin folded. It took a moment to remember he wasn't coming. 2 weeks ago, I had invited Brandon for dinner. He hadn't replied. Not a no. Not a maybe, just nothing. I left the extra plate untouched and poured myself a glass of wine instead. Sometimes silence isn't punishment, it's protection. The next day, I drove into town and stopped by the library. I'd seen a flyer a week earlier. Local book club. Over 60 and still reading. The humor had drawn me in, more than the subject. There were 6 of us, all women, seated in a loose circle surrounded by shelves that smelled like old ink and lemon oil. One woman, Jeanette, I think said, "You don't talk about your kids much." I looked up from my copy of the book we were discussing. "I'm learning to talk about myself first," I said. It was the first time in years I said something like that and meant it. We went around the circle sharing parts of our own stories. Some were light, some were heavy. Mine came in pieces, a little about the lake, a little about the house, a little about what it means to still want something for yourself after 60. That night, I finally opened June's envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper, clearly drawn with colored pencils. It was the lake house, windows glowing yellow, chimney curling with soft smoke, and at the bottom, written in careful, big letters, Grandma's real home. There was no apology, no explanation, just love. I sat back in the rocking chair and let the tears come, not sharp or angry, but soft, like a breeze that doesn't chill but reminds you it's autumn. For the first time in weeks, I cried and smiled. Later, in bed, I opened my journal and wrote I left without burning the bridge, but I also didn't light the path back. Not all families find their way again. Not all of them are meant to. But not all separation is failure either. Sometimes it's just a different kind of continuation. I closed the journal and turned out the light. Not everyone gets to rewrite the ending, but I chose to pick up the pen anyway. The phone call came just after breakfast. I was watering the basil on the windowsill when it rang a local number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. "Ms. Keener," the voice asked. "I'm Jenna from the Montpelier Herald. We'd love to feature you in our upcoming issue on elder financial independence." I blinked. "Why me?" "Well," she said, "we heard you bought a lake house. In cash. That's rare for anyone, let alone a retired woman. Your story, it's inspiring." I hesitated for a moment, then agreed. Not for recognition, but for something deeper. We met the next morning at the edge of the dock, the wind gentle, the water still. A week later, the headline read, "Retired Mother Buys Dream House. Her Family Tried to Claim." The story spread quickly. A few local papers picked it up. A regional podcast even reached out. People wanted to talk about what it meant for women, for age, for agency. Elowen did not take it well. The group text came within hours of the article going live. "I hope you're proud of yourself. Ruth, you've humiliated the family." I didn't respond. Later, Brandon messaged me directly. "You did what you had to do." I see that now. I left it on read. Sometimes silence is louder than 1,000 explanations. That evening, I sat at my desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of stationery. I began writing to June. "You asked me once if I was ever just visiting." I wrote, "No, sweetheart. I was building a home in my own silence." I paused, then added, "Never let someone else write your story, not even the ones who love you." I folded the letter carefully, sealed it, and set it aside to mail. The next morning, I met with my attorney. We sat in a small office overlooking the town square. The legal pad in front of me held clean pages. It didn't take long. "I want the lake house transferred directly to my granddaughter at age 25. I said, "It skips her parents." He raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "I want it written." I added that she only gets it if she's still writing, still dreaming. He nodded, scribbling quickly. "Beautiful condition, specific, protects the spirit of the gift." I smiled. "Legacy," I said, "isn't about what you leave behind. It's about who you choose to believe in." The day ended softly. I was on the porch sipping tea when a little girl from next door came skipping across the grass. She held a rolled-up piece of paper in both hands. "I made this," she said, cheeks flushed with pride. I unrolled it carefully. A painting, childish but full of color. It was me, in the rocking chair, staring out at the lake. "My grandma says you're the bravest lady in town," she said. I smiled, not because of the praise, but because it didn't matter anymore who saw what. Let them talk. This time, the story ends with me. I've learned that silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes it's a strategy. Sometimes it's self-respect. You can sit quietly for years, overlooked and underestimated, and still rise with dignity when the time is right. I didn't fight to prove my worth. I reclaimed it. For anyone out there who has felt erased in their own family, overlooked in their own story, I want you to know that your voice still matters, no matter how long it's been quiet. What would you do if you realized the people closest to you had rewritten your place in their lives? Would you challenge them, or would you find a new space to write yourself back in? If this story touched your heart, let me know by commenting 1 or telling me where you're watching from. And if it didn't, I'd still love to hear your thoughts, what didn't resonate, and why. And most importantly, if you believe in stories that honor real struggles, quiet strength, and second chances. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. More stories like this are on the way and you won't want to miss them.